Díobh Gachtain, hello everyone. You're really welcome to the alternative to Scoil gCláirseach 2020, the festival of early Irish harp which normally takes place each August in Kilkenny in Ireland. Between the 13th and 17th of August 2020, we'll be joining together each day to watch a talk, a workshop and concert footage from previous Scoilna. Find out more on our website at irishharp.org. It's day one of our 2020 Alternative Festival. Here's our first workshop.
Good afternoon, you're all very welcome to this workshop this afternoon. For those of you who are joining us from outside, you're particularly welcome. Thank you for supporting Harpmakers Day. This is a new venture of the Historic Harp Society of Ireland to support harp building in Ireland, and very specifically to support the building of early Irish harps within a historically informed framework. So I'm really delighted to see harp builders from Ireland and from outside Ireland. I think the furthest away is Pedro, who's come to us from Portugal, Pedro Ferreira. We have many people from Scotland, from the south of Ireland. I won't get into naming you all. Thank you very much for being here. I'd like to introduce Simon Chadwick, who's one of the world's foremost experts on early Irish harp, and I think this is going to be a very interesting presentation, which I haven't heard before, so I think Simon will gain a lot from it. So away you go.
Thank you very much. It's a workshop, so we're going to try and be hands-on. This is very difficult because there's a lot of us and there's not many harps. But we'll try and do the hands-on section, and we'll try and do it quite quickly towards later on in the session. And I'll say at the beginning, and I'll try and say later, if and when we get to the hands-on with the harp, this is not a playing workshop. So I don't want us to be playing the harps if you get a chance to hold one. So please don't get harp noises. This is a ergonomic workshop. It's a kind of tactile, experiential. And I'd like to say, from that tactile, experiential thing, thank you so much to the Harpmakers who have loaned instruments for us to use. So thanks to Michael and to Avan for letting me grab their harps, drag them up here, and possibly pass them around and let people sit at them. So why are we doing this workshop? Why do we have to have a workshop on replica harps and portraits of harpers? Ronan Brown wouldn't do a workshop on replica sets of harps and portraits of pipers because the living tradition of the pipes gives him the information he needs. But for the harp, we don't have that living tradition because it came to an end. If we want to try and connect to the old Irish harp tradition, we have to reconstruct it. And you reconstruct it using evidence. And two important pieces of evidence for performance practice are the harps and the portraits. A lot of the classes use the manuscripts, and you read the notation and you play the tunes. But I'm very interested in the idea that you have to play the tune on something, you have to have a harp to play it on, and you have to have a posture and a technique to sit at, and that's what this workshop is about. And I'm deliberately ignoring revivals after the death of the old tradition bearers about 200 years ago, because as soon as you start having revivals, you have influences from other traditions, especially from classical traditions. And I want to get right to the old Irish harp tradition, right to the native Irish indigenous roots of it. So that's why I'm jumping straight back to the old guys. So the harps in the museum, that those of us on the field trip on Tuesday will see, the harps that you'll see if you go to the museums. I think of these, they're beautiful objects, but you can think of them as a kind of repository of clues as to how to play the harp. Ergonomic clues and physical clues to posture, hand position, the way you hold the harp, the way you hold yourself at the harp. And this can inform our present day practice. So for example, if we look at the Queen Mary harp, we have Robert Bruce Armstrong's famous drawing of it. And he was very meticulous, and he drew all this fantastical decoration and that kind of thing. But he also drew very, very lightly little dotted lines where the decoration's been worn away, here and here. And what's worn away the decoration in those places? The harper who played the Queen Mary harp in the old tradition. And you think, how exciting, that's the wear marks. And yet it also shows us where the harper put their hands. Okay? And that's kind of interesting. And the Trinity College harp is the same, except the wear mark is much more obvious. You can see it very clearly here, the way it's gouged away, scooped away. Can you see that? And you can imagine sitting behind the harp, putting your left hand with that one and your right hand there. And I'm not the first person to think of doing this. In the 1960s, the Trinity College harp was sent to the British Museum to be repaired and restored. And Mary Rowland was asked to play it. To play it on the Trinity College harp. I mean, you wouldn't get that nowadays. But she wrote up what she thought. She said, the first time this harp was handled by me, it became immediately apparent that the deep wear marks on the soundbox give absolute indication as to the way it was held, i.e., on the left shoulder, with the left hand playing the treble strings and the right hand in the bass. This is the reverse order to all modern harps, including her own practice, which are placed on the right shoulder, with the right hand playing above the left as a general rule, etc., etc. This is not so with the Trinity College harp, for the depth of the wear marks also indicate that the harp had been held in position on its keel by the arms or wrists while playing, thus giving each hand only a limited range of action. Only in a kneeling position, or when sitting on a low stool with the harp standing on the floor, was it possible to fit the arms into the wear marks. She was doing this. She was there, sitting on the floor with the Trinity College harp, putting her wrists into the wear marks. Isn't that amazing, that visceral experience? There she is, with it. So the left-hand picture shows her, she explains, detailing the position of the hands and the way this harp was played. This was proved by the wear marks made by the arms on the soundbox. So she's put her wrist onto the harp where it's worn away, and then that's where her fingers touch the strings. And here she is with the harp on the floor, sort of kneeling, I think, and here's one knee up to support the soundbox, and the other knee down to support her, and her wrists placed in there. And so she was doing this as a kind of experiential experiment to find out how the harp worked, and this gave her insight into the way it was played. Now, one thing that she didn't talk about is the wear marks on the bottom of the harp. And it's very difficult to see. This, when the harp was rebuilt, all of this completely worm-eaten stuff was repaired for display, and so all this smooth area is all modern filler to build up the harp, and then the wooden parts at the side. You can see shiny filler, but you can see that there's wear on the corners, and it seems to be more on this side than on this side. And if you look at it close up, you can see this is the harp the other way around, looking from behind it. On the right-hand side, here's the original wood of the harp. And then here it's eaten away up to the middle. And on the left-hand side, here, this is the filler all the way to the corner. So the left-hand corner is completely gone, but the right-hand corner is quite well preserved. And I started thinking, why is that? What? Think of her sitting there. Think of her with the harp. And then the Queen Mary harp has the same thing. With the left-hand corner worn away in a little triangle, and the triangle wear away lines up with the foot. So do we have a volunteer to pick up the Queen Mary? Yeah, come on, Rachel, show us. Okay. And so the harp balances on its corner. Can everyone see that? Anybody else want a quick go to try this? Just sit at the harp and hold it. Anybody who wants to go can come down and do it right now. 2 people max. Because we've got to do lots of this and we can't everyone go. We'll be here until midnight. So very quickly. It's one thing to see it, but do you feel the way it balances on its corner?
Wow. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So we have to think, what's about sitting on the floor? Mary Rowland talks about a low stool. Look around the room, all the chairs are the same height, but we can't assume that in medieval times that was the case. So would they sit on the floor to play the harp? It kind of works, but are there other possibilities? You have to think about this, you have to experiment, you have to try. But then you can learn about possibilities of how the harp might be held and played. But I think Mary Rowland is the first person I've come across who actually did this work. And that's brilliant that she thought of doing this. So you can see there's a lot of evidence for the medieval Gaelic harp performance practice that comes out of the instrument. Even though we have no written music, we have no actual repertory for that instrument, but we can start to say quite concrete things about how the harp was played. And I find that very interesting as a starting point to think about performance practice. Okay, I found this page. There's a copy in the Historical Harp Society library, but you can't look at it because it's in its cataloguing frozen state. But this is the International Council of Musical Instrument Museums in one of their publications. And they had a whole issue devoted to copies of instruments. Mary Rowland, it's all right for her. She can go into Trinity College and she can handle and sit and put the Trinity College harp on the floor and sit at it. But we can't do that. They won't let us. It's very unfair, but that's the way the world is. And so we have the idea that, you could get a copy of the harp instead of having to handle the real thing. So these museum people talk about different types of objects. And I'm interested in this list. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I like the way that a museum professional dealing with historical musical instruments is starting to think that there's different kinds of things. And so they list, number one, the historical object. That's the thing you see when you go into the museum store, and it's there on the shelf with its label, and you're not allowed to touch it. Okay. Number two, the modern type, or usually called a reproduction. This category covers those instruments at which the instrument maker has knowingly departed from details of the historic object. So this is quite an interesting idea, that you can make something that is kind of similar to the real thing, but the maker changes it, and it can be done for all kinds of reasons, to make it cheaper, to make it look more modern, to make it easier to make. There's any number of reasons why you might do that, and some of them are good reasons, and some of them are less good reasons, depending on what you want. So it's an interesting idea, and I'm not sure I agree. Like I said, I'm not sure I agree with these categories, but I'm interested in the thought process. Number three, the reconstruction, and it's kind of speculative. That you do your research and you do a speculative reconstruction, and you make a new instrument that kind of is the original in a different state. Like if you have a broken instrument, you make it as it was before it was broken. If you have a harp that's missing some parts, you kind of invent things to fit in the parts. So maybe this is the instrument equivalent of our reconstructions of the manuscript sketches, where you're missing all the ornaments and the base and everything, and you have to invent something to fit it in. And then he says the true copy or exact copy should only be used when the instrument maker has tried to recreate a historical object in every detail. It's a legitimate goal, but it's always based on dated knowledge. So this is quite judgmental. And I'm not sure I like the attitude, but you can see that there's something thinking here that you can try and copy exactly every detail of an original. And you all know that that's not actually possible. Because you can't make an exact copy of anything, because on the micro detail it's going to be different. And then he says the counterfeit, and that's an interesting idea. And we don't really have, we think we don't have it. This is when a person tries to make a new harp, but they pretend it's an old one.
Maybe they're super successful counterfeit.
So we go into the museum and we look at these harps and say, yeah, this one is 18th century. How do you know it's not a Victorian fake? because that's what a counterfeit is. Okay? In actual fact, counterfeits are quite easy to spot, because when they're brand new, they look exactly right. And 20 years later, you look at them and you think, that looks so 80s. How could anyone ever fall for it? So counterfeits are very interesting, but we don't usually have to deal with that. But you do in some other areas, like in harpsichords, in violins. Counterfeiting is everywhere. So I just thought, these are things to think about. What do we mean by a copy? There's a whole load of different types of object that we might call a copy, or a replica, or a reproduction, or a reconstruction. And every word is nuanced and has implications. And I just like to be very careful with using these words. And you have to use a word that there's implications, etc. And one of the things that interests me is the whole aesthetics of the instrument, because aesthetic choices affect the way the instrument is made and presented and decorated. And there's an extent to which a lot of modern copies are not given as much decoration as the historical originals, or are given more decoration, or a different style of decoration. And I wonder how much the decoration is important in the experience of the reproduction or replica instrument, because the decoration is like an intrinsic part of it. And this photograph of the original Queen Mary harp in the museum is meant to show that when you sit at a harp, this detail here is what's in front of you. And your experience of sitting at the harp is strongly affected by that. I've never actually sat at the Queen Mary harp because it's in a glass case. Mary Rowland would have experienced this. But I have this on my harp. If you look inside the four-pillar, the most detailed area of decoration is up the inside. And it's worth just sitting with this harp for a second and looking at that and thinking, how does this affect your perception of what this object is? And how does that perception affect the music that you play? If this harp was functionally identical and made of clear perspex, your mindset when sitting at it would be very different from a hand-carved, painted, decorated object. And so the instrument maker, not only do they provide an acoustical tool, they provide a kind of psychedelic, mind-altering tool, because the act of sitting at it, touching it, feeling it, looking at it, changes your mindset. And I became very fascinated by that idea, that it's no good just having an instrument that makes the right noises when you're trying in the right places. The whole experience is an important thing. And a new piece of work that I've been doing recently connected to that is tuning pins. When Pedro was making my new harp, we talked a little bit about tuning pins, and I said, I would make the tuning pins, because I enjoy little bits of metalwork and contributing. And I started making pins, and I thought, these are not quite right. And so I did put a lot of time in to try and make better tuning pins. And so the tuning pins on this harp have these enormous decorated filed brass ends copying the originals. And who are the people who've been playing the simplified student versions of this harp? There's two of them in the room. There should be. Who was playing this? Come to the front. Okay. Come to the front. Sit on Barbara's seat.
Oh, okay.
Kick her off. So you should be fairly familiar with this harp.
Yeah.
What's your instant? So put your hands on the strings. Don't make a noise. Your hands on the strings. What do you instantly feel?
It's heavy.
Yeah, but what do you see?
Yeah, it's
Right in your face, there's this huge tangle of metal.
Yes, you're brilliant.
Yeah. But do they prevent you seeing what's going on? Yeah,
Maybe,
they kind of like this in your face. They're a little bit disturbing.
Yeah.
And I thought,
Because
that's
they
very
flex the
interesting.
line.
Yeah. But they're so much bigger than the modern pins that are used on the student instruments.
I have to be a little bit like.
Yeah. But isn't that interesting? That's a real ergonomic difference.
It's true.
Anybody else wants to try this? Anybody?
Someone playing on the left shoulder.
Yeah. Quick. We can't sit for 5 minutes wishing we had have a go.
Oh. It's like the first thing I'm saying, it's like I don't even see the strings
Okay.
really.
Yeah, next.
Yeah.
Come on, sit on the seat, it's easier than moving around. It's quite an effort to see past them, isn't it? Okay. One more person,
Me.
and then we'll move on. Don't be shy, I want everybody to have a go in the hot seat before the end of the session, but we can't all do every harp because there's too many of us. Okay, so Barbara's sitting here pulling funny faces.
There it is.
Yeah.
It kind of makes me want to look there, not there.
Yeah. So do you understand what I mean? There's an experiential difference that you sit at the harp and it's like, this is a different kind of object. Yeah.
Harpers blind, was just be more tactile.
Some were. Yeah, there's obviously a tactile difference as well. Some were. But Maura?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that for blind purpose, that wouldn't get in the way of
No.
It's not really blocking the view. It's just you're aware of it.
Yeah.
Are they exactly the same length?
As close as I could manage. No, they're not exactly the same thing because nothing's exactly.
What
the
are they
same.
number?
No. These are trying to copy the originals. Okay. And then that's, I thought, the fat carved tuning pin heads are a really important part of the experience of playing the harp that people have not paid attention to very much before, because not many harps have that. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. And I'm not familiar with it. I've never had a harp before with fat tuning pin heads like that. So now I'm eager to see what difference it makes, but I can see it makes a big difference. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about what we've got so far? Is it all clear? I understand where I'm going with it.
What, do we know what the Queen Mary harp sounded like when it was played?
No. How can we? But the whole point of the whole week here is to try and approach that.
No.
So this gives us more tools to approach that as well.
Well, no, I was referring to the lady in Trinity College who played.
Oh, Mary Rowland.
Yes.
Yes, the BBC recorded it.
Right.
And we have recordings.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have a
We have a small round of applause for Nancy Hurrell.
Simon, do you have a key then that's or can you use the normal keys?
No, you need a big key. So,
That's not
Yeah,
so
so-
if you lose it, then you're.
yes. I have a pocket key with lots of different sizes. So, yeah.
What's the name of the last harp?
It's a Carolan harp. It's in the National Museum. It used to belong to Carolan, and as far as I can tell, it went to his son and through the family, and then into the Royal Irish Academy.
What makes you think that's on it?
Working in the Royal Irish Academy minute books and archives, and I've written it up for the Garden Society that's coming out in the spring.
Okay.
So I found the missing records that connect it all in. It was sold to the Royal Irish Academy in 1847 by Mr. P. Carlton. I mean,
That's great.
for £6, yeah. So. And it has to be that harp because there's not enough. There's not another harp that it could be. It all cancels each other out. I mean, I can't prove it.
No.
But I can't think of an alternative option. You know. So, but like I say, I've written it up so in the spring you can read it, and then you can tell me what I've missed out. Okay, so we have the harps, but the other thing we have is portraits as evidence of performance practice. Okay. posture. I mean, he's sitting on the floor, but is that because that's a picture of performance practice, or is that because this is a Scoil's cartoon that's trying to show everything that's hideously debased about Irish life and society? So I don't. When you get early, and this is a 16th century picture. You can't tell much about performance practice, and you saw in my talk last night with the medieval stones. You really can't use them as evidence for ergonomics, hand position. No. But as time goes on, portraits become a more realistic genre. Oops, I'm pressing too much. Stop. So this is a 17th century portrait. And you look at it and you can kind of imagine those people actually sitting there. You can imagine that it's not a photograph, but you can imagine that the tableau. And yet, this is obviously an artistic composition. Look at the lines. Look at the line of the harp and the viol and the lute and the flute. The artist is being very clever here. The group of musicians didn't actually sit with their instruments all lined up in that beautiful line like that. The artist is adjusting things. So you could think about, look at the way he's tilting the harp on its side. But you could also say, did the artist get the harp down to line up with the violin? So do you see what I mean? You can start to say things, but it's not become certain. It's not really until the 18th century that you have portraits that, in the sense that we understand them nowadays, I think. And even then, there are problems. So the famous portrait of Carolan is fairly clear. You can see his blind eyes looking up. You can see the droop of his shoulder and his arm. You can see him resting his hand on the harp, a little bit like Mary Rowland was saying. You can just about see the green sleeve of his right arm drooping right down onto the base of the harp. And yet the shape of the harp seems strangely distorted. You can count the pins. There's only about 4 or 5 pins in the treble of the harp. It's not been done right. There's something distorted about it. It's like the artist is compressing the harp to fit in the frame. And as soon as you have that, you start to wonder. But you can think. This tells us something about Carolan and his posture and his attitude at the harp. And we can start to think about what he's doing, and that attitude teaches us something about what our attitude might be. We might want to be influenced by Carolan, and studying the portrait gives us a little bit of a, we might want to be influenced by Roland Brown, and so having him, he said, oh, look on YouTube, you'll be able to hear all my stuff there. But it's different to see him preparing and playing, and that can influence us. And so looking at the portrait of Carolan can influence us and let us think, how do you sit? How do you... Interesting. Okay. This one looks even more realistic. Lots of detail of the drapery, and yet look at the poses of the people. It's very staged. Look at the fingers pointing there, and the head to one side. And this girl is holding a manuscript of music and pointing at the harp, and he's got his hands on the harp. But do you see what I mean? There's still an element of staged artificiality about this. The portrait is not trying to show what the family looks like when they sit down for a music session. The portrait is trying to project staged, dramatic messages of relationship and status and importance. And so you have to decode those messages before you can say anything about his performance practice and how he plays the harp. The portraits of the tradition bearers can be very interesting because these, towards the end of the 18th century, are less trying to... These are not commissioned portraits trying to project an image of status and power like the previous one is. These are sketches to record what the person looked like. And I think they're recording what the person looked like with their harp in a more natural way. The flip side of that is that some of them are really not very good. When I found that there was a previously unknown portrait of the harpist William Carr, who was at the Belfast Harp Festival, Sylvia found the reference to it, and I chased up the portrait, and I was so excited, and I wrote to the Cambridge College that has the manuscript, and they sent me the sketch, and here it is, and I just thought, come on, can you not draw a better sketch than that? I mean, what does this tell us about Carr, what he looked like, and how he held his harp? It's just hopeless. So there's a different problem once you get to these sketches of the tradition bearers. But you start to look and you start to think, look, you can see his hand on the harp. You can look at the shape of his thumb. You can see how his fingers are bent. And you can look at his bass hand. His thumb is up. His first finger his first finger is thumb. Number 1 is up. Number 2 is bent down. Number 3 is stretched out a little bit. Number 4 is reaching down, and number 5 is off. And look at his treble hand. Number 1 is up. Number 2 is hooked, number 3 is on the next string, number 4, number 5. You can start to think what shape his hands are and how the hand position works on the harp. So, and yet they're still rubbery fingers, so I'm not sure how that works. This is Arthur O'Neill. There are harps that are said to be Arthur O'Neill's, but not this one in his portraits. And you can see it's very distinctive with the scroll. And so the nearest to this harp that we have in the room is again the Carolan harp. And so we'll use it as a stand-in, acknowledging that this is not a perfect match. And so what we can do is we can start to think, okay, Arthur O'Neill is a really important tradition bearer for us, and we want to be influenced by him. So we can try and copy his posture and his way of holding the harp. So I would like a volunteer to come and be Arthur O'Neill. Yes. If nobody volunteers, then we sit here looking at each other for 10 minutes instead of working. So what we're to do is we're to kind of instruct. Or how about? So slowly and carefully and think, and we don't want any noises because this is experiential and thoughtful. But does anybody say? So you can see David's posture, and I can't because I'm standing here. But does anyone have anything? What's different?
The right hand perhaps lower down.
Right. So David, take your right hand
Yes.
and lower down.
Okay.
Like press it? Yeah.
Yeah. What else?
No, the top of the harp is much thicker.
Look at his hands. The top of the harp is thicker.
It's much thicker.
In what direction?
The width.
Well, you can't see the width of his harp because.
Well, you can see the width of this one.
Yeah, but that's
That changes your posture.
Look at the shape of his hands. Look at his left hand. It's kind of like this, isn't it? So curl your fingers down like that. So it's kind of strange, isn't it? And what about the right hand? Look how he's got. It's like this.
That's really hard.
So look in this fingers. Stretch these two like that. Yeah.
I would also say about the relationship of the head with
Yeah.
the
So what's his head doing?
It's almost resting on the horse.
Yeah.
But he's looking very well looking. His head is pointing forward.
Yeah.
It's very nestled sort of
Yeah.
inside the harp.
It's looking straight forward. You'd wonder, was he able to keep an eye on the strings or?
But
He's
he's
blind.
blind.
But he's sitting fairly straight.
Yeah, look at the shape of his shoulders. What's David's shoulders like? Yeah. He's not hunched over, but neither is he.
Yeah, but it's
David.
Right.
Another to try and be after Neil.
More on harpers and
Because there's a book.
And I have to say at once that this is actually quite difficult to do for two reasons. One is because it's quite difficult to copy the shapes, and another is because these are not photographs, these are sketches, and so everything's distorted and gone a bit wrong. And so you're kind of trying to copy an impossible thing. So, Maura, don't look at the screen, but other people look at the screen and tell you what to do.
Okay.
I think this is a more useful way of working. So, left-hand fingers, I think they should be more like this angle, shouldn't they? It's really strange the way his hand is up like this.
maybe he has his thumb
Like that?
placed and all the rest is
Or down like that.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, like this, almost closed.
Oh, more close.
It's almost
I wonder about the head and the shoulders.
Well, the shoulders are way more forward because.
Yeah, so more, you're not hunching over enough.
Punching over now.
Yeah.
Well, but what?
And then they're instantly, sorry, go on.
The string spacing of the actual instrument is way wider, so that it makes that you have to.
Yeah, and so now that's a very interesting comment, because now we want to get up against the problem that this harp is not actually the harp in the portrait,
Yeah.
and so there's a limit to how far we can take this exercise.
His arm looks really, really long, doesn't it?
yeah, we have to make
This is
some
why I say the
harp
distortion.
Because it should be kind of resting on my.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that I notice is that his foot's just about the front.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's
yeah,
why I
right.
kind of put it up higher.
Yeah.
If you
This-
have it down like this, that's, yeah,
This is the thing I find about these portraits, is that every time you look,
yeah,
you see another little detail. So I'd forgotten about the foot.
yeah.
But
And
do you
then-
see what I mean? There's so much adjustments you can make to your.
Simon, about the length of the arms, I remember being in a museum once and seeing 18th century uniforms, and the arms did seem to be longer and thinner.
People are different shapes. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Warwick is not the same stature
Yeah.
as David.
Yeah.
And so neither of them, they can't both be the same stature as Arthur and Neil. So
Yeah.
there's an issue there as well. Okay, here's the portrait of Charles Byrne. And I've put up beside it the Muller-Mast harp, which seems to be at least a very similar instrument, if not the same instrument. I'm not certain about this. Michael has studied it and is pretty certain, I think.
Pretty so.
Yeah. So you can at least see that it's the same design of instrument, it's the same kind of size and everything. I also have a slight question about whether this is actually Charles Byrne or not, because the attribution only comes from 1911, and we don't. Have you ever seen the original?
Do you want to see the original?
They don't seem to have it.
No, I think it's not in Queen's.
It
It
never
is.
was, because she returned
It was asked to go back to the family.
it. She
and-
returned it.
and
She,
so-
if you read her character, right,
Yeah.
she was very formal,
Mm.
very violent, very sort of.
This is
honest
Charlotte
about-
Milligan Fox in
Yes.
1911. Yes.
And she'd have got that, and she'd have seen the request, please can you
Please
return
return
it
it,
to the
yeah.
family?
Yeah.
She'd have returned it to
So
the
it's
family.
gone back.
So you won't
Yeah.
find it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the family, the places that became a horse centre,
Yeah.
it's like, you won't find it now.
So,
But it would have been written on the back, the way they always
yeah.
find
So we
these
assume,
old
that
photographs
this
of portraits
is a transcript
was what was written on
of
the
the
back.
caption on the back of the picture. Yeah. But you know, without inspecting the original, you can't know.
They lost a piece of evidence.
So,
Yeah, we
so-
have to-
and there's a lot of that kind of thing. You know, there's a lot of things that you think, if only. But,
Yes.
but it is what it is, and we have to use it. You can't write it off because of that.
The other thing, Simon, to confirm what you were just saying about
Yes.
the size, I scaled that up, and if you look at Charles Byrne and you look at the Muller, bearing in mind that, as I said, that the block had been cut short,
Mm.
so this is actually taller. He was a very small guy, tiny man. And of course, the other thing is, of course, we look around us, I happen to live in a 200-year-old house, right? And there are doors at this time.
Yes.
Some years ago, I went up back with Bandon Road up in Cork, and there was one old house, a long terrace of the Breeze. They both had these raised.
Yeah.
There's one old house that's still there.
You could stand up straight.
I could stand up and
You had-
excuse me,
It's got slightly.
the leaf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
do-
we do forget with poor nutrition, people were very much.
So do we have a short volunteer to be Charles Byrne? Constance. So again, I want you to not necessarily look at the picture, because I want you to be Charles Byrne. So we'll instruct you. So sit down and take the harp. Okay. So Barbara says very good, on the edge of the chair. Is the chair the right height? Look at the angle of the legs.
It's a hard chair.
You see, that's the other thing. That's a normal chair.
Feet, where are the feet? So put your feet forward, yeah. What about the angle of the harp? Yeah, so we need to tuck the harp right in like that.
Yeah, but then it will just fall forward.
Well, you need to grip.
No, it's
Well, you need to hold it maybe?
He's gripping it with his legs.
Yeah, it looks like he's holding it with his right foot.
Yeah.
He's pressed it. That's how the wear marks come out.
Yes.
Okay. Hands.
Left hand is really,
Left
really
hand
wide
up and curling round, yeah. And right hand. Look at the shape of the right hand. It's like this,
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah.
But it's in the
Index
middle of
finger
the
hooked.
harp. It's
Yeah.
not far
It's not
down.
really
But look how close the hand is to the soundboard.
Yeah.
Both hands, really close in.
Yeah.
Like it's to do with clutching the harp back towards you.
Yeah.
And the hairstyle.
Well, not bad for a 90-year-old, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's no sign of the foot.
That was what I was just thinking.
Yeah,
That makes
yeah,
it easy.
yeah.
That it's on
Yeah, it was cut.
So you think the foot was already cut?
Yeah, that's what I was saying, because I arranged to have half the block taken away, which was actually a heavy weight
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that lever, because there was cracks coming. And when you could see it be cut and this oak base had been put on, you could see the oak base, you see it curls round in the front. You know, and there's no other harp like that.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe that foot was actually sacrificial, like they have this on boats, just to put on to
Yeah. I was talking to an antique furniture man. He said about why chairs were so low, and he said often you would, in the trade, they cut the legs off the chairs when they get woodwork.
Way down.
So yeah, there's all kinds of possibilities. But actually, I'm less interested from this point of view in those explanations as to why a thing was done. We're talking about the experience of using the thing, you know. So, the hand, sorry, I forgot this one. Okay, Dennis Hampsey. And there he is with the downhill harp. We'll see in Guinness's. So do we have a volunteer to be Dennis Hampsey? Jim, up you come.
We should turn the chair around first.
Oh yeah, very good. But actually it is important if we're doing the comparison.
Oh, you have the hat.
The Okay, so we have to start with the hat, don't we?
pull the hat down.
I mean, look at that angle of the hat. I think you might a bit more down to the nose.
A little bit.
Yeah, this is good.
Do we have to chop the head off?
Remove the
The
glasses.
Okay.
Off the glasses.
What about the height of the chair and the height of Jim?
It's a higher chair.
Is it a higher? Look at the angle of the thighs. Is it actually a higher chair? Or is Dennis Hampsey a short man? Or is he hunched? Can you hunch over, Jim? Yeah, can you?
You want to rest your chin on the top.
Oh, yeah, look.
Until your head like
Perfect.
that. Yeah. That's perfect.
Okay, handshakes. The left hand, the fingers are quite.
Foot straight.
Left hand fingers like this. Very, very gentle and curved, yeah. And then look at the right hand. It's this kind of fan-shaped thing with the right hand like this.
Oh, yeah.
Fan out, and then the thumb very low, like he's already played a string or something like that.
Oh, that was nice. Yes. And now can you look towards us, rest your chin up?
Rest your
on the
chin
heart?
up,
Oh,
halfway
yes.
down.
Okay.
And look towards the audience.
One poke. A bit grumpier, maybe.
But Jim, do you have any comments about what that feels like?
Yeah, it's just that I'm so used to looking at the harp like this when I'm playing. I don't know whether you could see the harp, would you?
Well, he was blind.
He
Anyway.
was blind,
Stop the singing.
yeah, that's a good point. So it would interfere with singing.
Was O'Hampsey blind?
Yes, yes.
Then he had this extra sensory thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He also had a very large growth in the back of his head,
Yeah,
which is why the
yeah,
hat. The hat.
Yeah, the hat's
And there's
different.
another picture when
See
you
how high that
see
hat
down the
is.
back there. That must have weighed a lot.
It also might be that he had to rest his chin because of the wind.
Yeah.
He was looking to support the weight of his head. So
Another volunteer to be Dennis Hampsey.
Oh, I was saying that resting on it feels resonant, so the sound of goes
Yes.
directly.
Yes. Okay, so no hat, but never mind. Okay, I think Dennis is sitting a bit further forward on the chair than that. Yeah, like that. It's worth going home and trying this. Except you have to have a collection of harps like this. so visit your local harp maker and place an order now.
You'll have to get a special chair as well. That probably
Yeah. So the chin, Paul, and the hunch, curl it back over. Yeah.
And bronco face.
But it gives you a different experience of the harp, doesn't it? To do this.
Paul, elbow to wrist is parallel with the floor in your left arm.
Yeah, your left arm needs to be dropped down to here, doesn't it?
That's it.
And doesn't your right arm need to be low as well, like that?
But if he does that parallel, then this
And
is
his
lower
mouth
down
needs to
than.
be.
Yeah. So just doesn't have to have short arms.
No, but
I
it looks
found
like
a
this.
letter from Edward Bunting in the Linen Hall Library where he discusses this portrait, and he said, yeah, somebody said it would be really difficult for the engraver, so I've changed it.
But at the same time, it looks like his elbow is going.
And I don't know what he's talking about. Is he talking about cross hatchings and textures, or is he talking about? And so that this is really important to remember as well. There's a limit to how much you can trust these things.
One thing that struck me is the harp actually does look quite big compared to a Hampsey.
Yeah. So I think he's a small man. I think so. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Oh, I keep forgetting the hands. Yeah.
I think I read the finial used to come off or something.
But,
The finial of the harp, because does it match the picture?
yeah, I think there's an easy answer to that. When you go to the
Then he put it
museum,
in his pocket.
when you
or
go to the
something?
museum, there's a big glue joint
Yeah.
right
And
here.
then it came off, and he put it in his
Yeah,
pocket.
yeah,
Right.
or something. But it's clearly original, but it's been glued on. And on the
Right.
portrait, just here, it's not there.
Right.
And in the other portrait, you can see the jagged, splintered edges of the wood. So, but he must have kept it because
Yeah,
it's fixed back on.
I think he put it in his pocket or something.
Yeah.
So what year would that be? Well, he died in...
1809 is the date of the engraving, yeah. Okay, so this is the portrait of Patrick Quinn, sitting with the Otway harp. And I've left this one last because this is clearly the most accurate and realistic portrait of any of the old harpers. And I think one of the ways you can see that is by comparing the portrait of the harp with the real harp.
What about William Archie? Don't you think that's really...
No, because he's projecting his baroque gesture and everything, so it's not a realistic portrait of.
Well, are you saying it might not be? Because it could be a realistic portrait.
I don't have any problem with that.
With
But he stays
Largely.
Yeah, it just looks really solid.
I think he looks very comfortable. He's not playing.
okay, the other thing is that I'm thinking of the group of 18th century tradition bearers.
Right, yes, sorry, of
So
course,
I should have
yes.
qualified that.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, absolutely.
So compared to a Hampsey or William Carr or Arthur O'Neill or any of that, this portrait is a whole step up. So we don't have a copy of the Otway harp here. And I've never seen a good copy of it. But we do have Courtier's very simple, quick and dirty, simplified ones. So, does anybody want to come and be Patrick Quinn? You've already had a go. So who hasn't had a go?
I think the chair is divided.
So this harp is not exactly the same shape and size as the Castle Otway harp. So we're back in Arthur O'Neill territory. We're approximating, but we can use it as a kind of, we can still do the work, we just have slightly more difficulty. So, yes, height of chair.
Yeah, I think the chair is divided.
Yeah, because look, his thigh is always,
Yeah.
Can we switch the chair?
Can we try and run his little stool? This might be too short.
Yeah.
Goldilocks.
It's not bad.
Okay, so actually look at the level of her head to the top of the harp. So this is going to work.
Do you think his harp, the soundboard is more like vertical? Like it seems like his whole harp.
Okay, so Rachel says, yeah, tuck the bottom of the harp in closer to you. Tuck it right in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, do you think his thigh is holding the box up in the corner?
Yes, because look, he's hooked his. On the inside of your knee here, there's a little bony knob, and you can hook that harp behind that, and that clutches the harp to you. And especially if his wrist is on the soundboard, this wrist is on. It's like he's clamping the harp against
See how
himself.
the foot is turned as well. It's
Yeah. And we can't see what he's doing with his other knee, which is a shame. But yes, he's drawing the harp in like this, really pulling it to himself. And look at his head. He's blind, so he doesn't need to look. But this is your thing that you mentioned. He's setting all his cheekbones against the wood of the harp, so the resonance comes right up into him.
And his right hand looks like it's really resting on his leg.
Yeah, his right hand down on the leg, or this part of his arm.
Oh yeah, the arm.
Yeah, not this part. This part on the leg. And the shape of his right hand, with his thumb up, and his first finger in, and his middle finger bent, and his fourth finger straight, and his pinky just curled a bit under, and his left hand with Sylvia's gap, and the thumb up like this.
If you squint, you could be a piper.
Why did you say that?
Just he's looking down like this. He's got, you do the chanter on your leg.
That's very interesting because it just gives you another visceral sense of how the musician holds themselves, how they experience the music.
What about the wear marks? Then you're mentioning the words work and the marks.
So on the Otway harp, there's wear down the side, there's wear at the bottom. I think it matches.
It's probably much older than Queen. That wear is considerable, isn't it?
It's a lot of wear, isn't it?
There's a lot of people wearing that.
But on the other hand, the tradition is conservative. The harp remains the same size. You're going to have to kind of hold it in the same way to make it work, so it's no surprise. Ronan talked about wear on his pipes. It's an interesting thing. It's worth looking at when we're in the museum. Anyway, we should stop.
Questions?
So,
Time for a question?
yes.
This is 3 points I'd like to make. It's a bit of a zeal newly converted rather than any knowledge.
Go for it.
Number one, I was at a conference in Japan years ago, at least 20 years ago, and we had this big, for the planning committee, which I was sort of associated with, a big banquet, see? And everybody sat on the floor. And there were tables roughly the height of that stool. So the tables were about this height. And it was excruciating to sit like a tailor. But
for you, but not for them.
No, not for them. And eventually, they brought in for us the backs of chairs with no legs.
Yes.
And then we were able to put our legs out straight and sit. But if you imagine, the first picture that we showed, I've often wondered if everybody was sitting on the floor, on the ground in that.
Yes. Maybe.
That's point number one. Point number two is the difficulty an artist would have of drawing a harp, but they might not see it very often. I mean, do you draw?
No, you're right, it's difficult. Have you seen that? Even in a good portrait, the harp gets a bit wobbly.
I'm not very good, I trained as an architect. And the first thing you do is you get the main lines of the thing while it's still there
Yes.
and before the person moves. And maybe that drawing from the Cambridge College that struck me, maybe that's actually highly accurate, almost a photograph of an instant. You know,
it's his travel diary. Every day he writes what he's done, and he draws a sketch of it.
And that therefore might actually be far more accurate than one suspects. And then later on, it's easy to fill in human physiology and stuff, as we all know what people look like.
Yes.
But
you can't fill in the harp.
And then you could extrapolate that no harp thing to all illustrations of people with harps.
Yes.
The artist always has the same problem. There's no harp to draw anymore, and they don't understand how harps work even. And in order to make it, I'm sorry, I've just almost finished. In order to make a good drawing of any sort of structure, or you know those funny ridges by the Calatrava, you actually have to understand the structures.
That's one of the great values of this portrait, because you can compare every detail from portrait to harp. He's got the little tiny glints of the nails and the metal oil just right. On the original, you can see the lines of decoration up here. You know, you can see the little flower in the sound hole.
Simon, the point, sorry, I don't know your name.
Connell.
The point Connell made about the sketch is so true, because if you remember before that one was discovered, what was the one we were looking at? The focus engraving. Monster of a harp.
Yes.
Big thing, never worked. And yet, it's come from the same early sketch that Miss Prosser did. And that's the finished item. And that sketch that Brockus used was just at the head and just a few lines of harp, which exactly fits in with what you were saying.
But I don't want to despair and say therefore we can't use the portraits to inform us, because they're imperfect, incomplete, distorted, but they're what we have. But this combination of the portrait and the accurate, detailed, decorated, handmade replica art, this is a combination that I think has a huge amount of scope for us to use to develop our own practice in rediscovering this tradition. That's it. We're done.